Hey guys, welcome to our Wednesday evening premiere. We are thankful that you're joining us, and we're looking forward to continuing our study this week of Jesus' meeting of the Samaritan woman at the well. We're in John chapter 4. Last week, Chad and I talked about, Blaine was gone. He had finals last week, and those are over, and he is ready to go now. So we're back in John chapter 4. Last week, we talked about Jesus meeting the Samaritan woman at the well. We talked a lot about the relations between the Jews and the Samaritans and the race wars that were going on between the two people, why there was such a hatred. We spent a lot of time talking about living water and how the difference between what they had been doing and what they were looking forward to with Jesus coming, going to produce in them, and that living water was actually more of a running water, something that we all look forward to. Something that we needed, and it was better than what they had. So if that's a pretty good summary, I want to read verses 16 through 18 as we get started today. He told her, "Go call your husband and come back." She said, "I have no husband." And Jesus said to her, "You're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true." Chad, you got something on verse 16 there?
Well, I kind of thought it was interesting that her her last response before Jesus speaks again in verse 16 is, "Hey, I want some of that water because I don't want to keep coming here to draw water out. This living water, you said a minute ago, it's fresh and running, and that's great. But at this point, her life is filled with stale and stagnant and moldy water, right? So she's in her mind thinking, I can get water to drink that's fresh and it's going to taste so much better. But Jesus is about to open her eyes to say, I wasn't really just talking about water, H2O. I was talking about your life and how you're living and what that looks like and where it's been, in her mind or in her life, stale and stagnant and moldy. Jesus says, I'm going to give you something fresh and clean and running, and it's just going to be better than what you can even think of. And the way he says that, or way he brings that up, I guess, is by saying, go call your husband. And that opens up pretty interesting discussion. Did y'all say anything about that? Okay, so here's what I said about it. Did you have something, Blaine?
No. Well, yeah, I was trying to unmute it, but
Go ahead, Blaine.
yeah, so kind of, going along the same lines, he brings up, the lifestyle she's living and how she's living sinfully, and it makes her kind of aware of the flaws she has, and kind of shows her the need for, forgiveness and change of lifestyle, and that, the living water Jesus is talking about.
So we don't, we're not told a whole lot about her previous marriages or how they ended. We just kind of are left to assume that there was, some bad behavior on her part and probably bad behavior on the guy's part. We're probably not supposed to assume that the marriages ended in death. They ended in some kind of formal or informal separation or divorce or something like that. Which probably explains why she goes to the well in the middle of the day to not talk to anybody. She wants to avoid everybody that she can. But what we pretty quickly pick up on is Jesus is putting his finger on the pulse of the problem, and he's saying, you're here in the middle of the day because you want to stay away from people and want to, have this to yourself because you're probably ashamed of what's going on in your past and have had emotional upheaval after emotional upheaval, and it's just been terrible, terrible, terrible. But she knows at this point that Jesus knows that her life is a mess, that it's stale, stagnant, moldy, and she has heard some kind of promise of fresh, clean living. And I think Jesus is going to hit on that a little bit more.
So I'm going to stay on this point for just a little bit longer. We don't know a lot about this woman's past situation. Palestinian law probably wasn't a lot different than Jewish law. Women could not initiate divorce, and so at this point in time, she had maybe been a guilty party in some situations, but at the very least, we know that she had been put away 5 different times. We don't know the situation of why she's living with the man that she's living with now and not married to him. There's lots of reasons why she could be there. My guess is, and the one I like the most, is that she's probably just trying to get by. If you think about a woman being divorced 5 times, if she had been divorced or her husbands had died, she's carrying some bad juju around with her. Is juju a word I can use? I don't know.
Yeah.
She's got some bad context behind her. She's carrying a lot of baggage, and so I think that's what Jesus picks up on too. And when he calls out this baggage, he's saying, "I know you've got a lot of hurt." That's one of the reasons she's at the well at noon too. Is she's an outcast, just like a lot of the outcasts that we've talked about throughout this series. She's somebody that is going to be not looked after. Nobody's coming to her rescue. She's doing what she can do to get by at this moment. And that's why I think when Jesus comes to her and says the things that he says, we need to pay very special attention to what he's offering.
Yeah, I like that. One of the things when you get into verse 20 that we're going to start seeing is exactly what I see today still. I can preach sermons on, just in the last 5 weeks, I've covered things like, hey, be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. That means change how you're living and stop decay of evil and start spreading some hope in this world. I've talked about turning the other cheek and going the extra mile and not returning evil for evil and loving your enemy and praying for those who would persecute you and things like that. And that's all about life change. That's great. And it's all about, hey, do better and let's be more like Jesus and let's change the way we live and let's, start thinking more about how I go about my life and what I say and what I do and how I act and who I am. And a lot of times when I start preaching sermons like that, I hear somebody or I hear comments to say, we really need some sermons about, music and worship. We need to we need to talk about some doctrine. We need to talk about some marriage, divorce, remarriage. That's in our text today. We need to talk about, some of the issues that plague the church today. And I get it. There's a time for issue talk, and there's a time to preach what we typically refer to as doctrine, even though that just means teaching. And that's exactly what this woman does. He says, hey, let's talk about your life a little bit. Go call your husband. And she says, well, I don't have a husband right now. And he said, wait, you're right. You've had 5 of them, and you're apparently living with a guy right now, and he's not your husband yet. And her immediate response is, you're a prophet. Let's talk religion for a little while. Our father said this, verse 20, worshipped on this mountain. You say that in Jerusalem is a place where people ought to worship. And so it's interesting to me that he says, hey, we need to talk about your life and the decisions you've made and what you've been doing and the choices that have brought you to this destruction in your life. And she says, can we just talk about religion for a little while? Can we talk about some doctrinal issues? Can we talk about worship? Can we talk about, the issues that are plaguing, the religious world today? And it seems like that's what we go to whenever we get a little bit uncomfortable about the life changes that God calls us to make. It's so much easier for me to hear, hey, let's talk about women's roles in worship, or let's talk about instrumental music, or let's talk about our worship, specifics. So much easier to hear sermons that I typically already agree with doctrinally than it is to hear somebody tell me, hey, you got to love your enemies. The people that don't like you and mistreat you, you got to treat them better than they treat you. And so we jump to, well, let's talk about something that's safe and it's easier for us to talk about, black and white. And I think that's exactly what she does here. What do y'all think?
Yeah, Jesus is offering living water, and she wants to bring up a 500,000-year-old debate about which mountain do we worship on. Do we worship in the temples that the Samaritans have built, where they have gone against God's direction for the temple that's in Jerusalem, or do we worship in Jerusalem? And it's a big debate that has gone on between these people probably 500 to 1,000 years. And she's asking Jesus, okay, so let's see where you stand on this. And I think we test people that way. Just like Chad was saying with, you need to change your life, is what Jesus is saying. I'm giving you something that is greater than all of this. And her test to him is, well, where do you stand on where we worship? Where do you stand on free will? Where do you stand on LGBTQ rights?
Yeah.
Where do you stand on these issues that are debated in the religious world that really have no end in sight? It's going to be a debate forever. Where do you stand on that? I think she not only changes the subject, but she's testing Jesus as a prophet just to see where he stands.
Yeah. I think what you just said reminded me, this is probably a decade ago. I was preaching at a different church, and I preached a lot of sermons on, hey, change your life. Let's do something that matters. Let's, follow Jesus better. And I was called in one day, and they said, we want you to preach more of the basics. And I was like, I'm preaching the basics. It's about following Jesus. And I think the title of the series of sermons I was preaching was Follow Jesus. It's like, you can't get more basic than that. What are you looking for? And then they had a list of stuff that I needed to start preaching. So just exactly what she does. Hey, you're getting me uncomfortable in who I am and what I'm doing. Can we just talk about something safer, something that we can just like agree with up here and not do anything with? And she goes back to this discussion of, hey, well, our people worshiped on that mountain, you say over in Jerusalem. And Jesus says in verse 21, woman, believe me, the hour's coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. This discussion had kind of hinged on the temples. It had hinged on the Jerusalem temple and Mount Gerizim over here with the Samaritans. And even when Solomon built his temple, this grand thing that he spent years and years and who knows how much expense in building, when he built it, he said, hey, it's great. I'm paraphrasing. These weren't his words. It's great, but God's way bigger than this. I can't build a house that can contain God. And here, centuries later, after that temple has been built and has, gone through a lot of troubles, they're still saying, well, where can we really access God? Even though Solomon said, well, God is way bigger than this house that I built him, they're saying, which of these mountains do we go to access God? And Jesus says, you still got it wrong. All right, the time's coming, and now is when we're not going to be worried about which mountain we're on. Verse 22, he said, you worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is of the Jews. That probably didn't sit very well with her, I'm guessing. But the hour's coming, and now is when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. I think every time in John's gospel where he says truth, he says what's authentic. It's not, it's not true based on a set of core principles, and these are the doctrinal elements that we adhere to be worshiping in truth. It's you're worshiping what is true. Everything before this was a shadow of the good things to come, and Jesus says the time is coming, and it's here when you're going to worship the real thing in spirit. And he says that's basically who I am. Y'all got anything on those? Okay. So God, verse 24, God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. And the woman says, well, I know that the Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. And when he comes, he will tell us all things. Let's go back to talk about, prophecies, and let's talk about fulfillments, she says. And Jesus cuts her off pretty quickly. And he says, hey, that's great that you know the Messiah, the Christ, is coming. And I who speak to you am he. You found him, right? Y'all got anything on any of that?
John has, I think, 7 I am statements. His I am statement goes way back to Moses' exchange with God when he says, who should I say sent me? And he says, I am. This is a clear, in this I am statement, Jesus saying, this is me saying that I am God. This is me saying, I am the Messiah. I am who you are to be looking for. I think it's funny that Jesus, maybe not funny, maybe it's ironic, or maybe it's purposeful, that Jesus gives this first I am statement in the book of John to a Samaritan woman at a well who has been living in sin. And the person that he met the chapter before was Nicodemus. This is a running theme, right? We've seen this running theme week after week of Jesus meeting with his disciples and teaching different people and revealing himself in different ways. but he's giving his most, it seems, to the outcast, to those that are hurting, to those that are broken. Nicodemus is an extremely popular religious leader. He's got it together. He's a Jew of Jews. And Jesus does not give him the first I am statement. I'm not saying it's a competition of who gets the first I am statement, but I think it's telling of who Jesus came for. She's not even a Jew.
Yeah.
She is a Samaritan living a broken life. And that's who Jesus gives his first I am statement to. I think we can learn a lesson from that about who we go to and who Jesus came for.
So I'm not convinced that she knows everything that's going on right now. He says, I'm the guy you're looking for. I'm the Messiah, the Christ. And then verse 27, his folks come back, the disciples, and they marvel that he's talking with a woman. Oh, nobody did that. He crosses boundaries. But no one said, what do you seek? Or why are you talking with her? And so the woman left her water jar and went away into town and said to the people, hey, and you know, I guess some could falter for not saying the right words. I found Jesus Christ, the Son of the ever-living Hebrew God. She didn't say that. She said, hey, come find this man who told me all that I ever did. She's not convinced. She leads with a question. Can this be the Christ? My guess is that she probably sees Jesus somewhere on the spectrum of, smart guy, wise guy, to fortune teller, to this guy's been watching me for too long, or maybe Son of God, Messiah, Christ. She doesn't know, but she, the Samaritan woman who was shunned by society, who goes to the well in the middle of the day when nobody else does, who wants to avoid people at all costs, an hour ago, is now running into town saying, y'all come meet this guy that I just found. It's a total reversal. She's not sure what it is. There's something special there. But she's got a spiritual hunger and a spiritual thirst that she thinks she's found a way to fulfill.
Really, just the eagerness of that woman. After she meets Jesus, talks to Jesus, it makes me think back to the first chapter of John when Andrew sees Jesus, he runs and gets Simon Peter, and then Philip runs and gets Nathaniel. And with the woman, Jesus didn't sugarcoat the conversation. He told her, he talked about her sin, and he spoke nothing but the truth. But the key is he spoke all that in love, and the Samaritan woman knew that. He wasn't trying to shame her. He wasn't trying to embarrass her. He wanted nothing more than for her to, give her life over to him. And I think Jesus' abundant love overflowed from that woman and from Andrew and from Philip, and that led to, their eagerness to go out and to share Jesus with everybody.
One of the things I've been thinking about is Satan's displeasure in all of this. Satan has to be fighting mad. He's got the Jews. I think, first of all, I think Satan lives in the confusion and the muchness of life sometimes. So I think Satan has got the Jews wrapped up, living in their goodness, maybe. Certainly the religious leaders, they feel like they are better than, and they are living in their goodness. And then because of this, the rest of the world is not seeing God's light come from Israel like they were supposed to. And then you've got this woman who is also wrapped up in an age-old debate about which mountain do we worship on, Gerizim or Jerusalem. Satan's in the confusion. And here Jesus is, and he comes and he says, that age-old debate, that confusion, no longer matters. He comes and he says, I came for all people, not just Israel, but through a broken woman, and he's going to show that he's going to work through brokenness. So you've got a society, and I think we still have a society today that says, I'm good, I'm going to live in my goodness and be satisfied in my goodness. And in that same way that we've taken the goodness of ourselves, that we take and we say, you've got this outcast of society who can't live up to our level, and so they're outcast. And Jesus comes and he works in those people. Satan's got to be mad because Jesus is bringing everything together. He's doing away with the confusion. He's doing away with the muchness. He's doing away with all of the things that separate us, and he's uniting everybody to himself. And when he does this, Jesus drags this woman's baggage out into the light of day, and he says, I'm going to work on you through your baggage, through your hurt. Yeah. This person that's having to go to the well in the middle of the day is going to become, as we're going to see, an unlikely evangelist. I wonder, and this is kind of the last thing I've got, as an unlikely evangelist, I wonder how people change their view of this woman following her testimony. The last few verses 39 through 42, people come to see Jesus because of what they heard, but they get to know the real Jesus based on what they see. And so we've got these Samaritans who are being drawn to Jesus because of a woman that is the outcast of society showing them. And I guess if I had a major takeaway, I think we're past the 20-minute mark already. Mine would be, I think we've seen time and time again, people who gain the most from coming to Christ are oftentimes the ones that share the most and that give the most. And those of us like me who have grown up with what I've gotten, and my life today doesn't look a whole lot different than it did when I was younger growing up. Sometimes we need to be reminded that Christ came and he worked through broken people to unite all people. And it didn't come through our goodness. He didn't come to save us in our goodness. He came to seek and heal and save the sick and the lost and the dying. And that's what he does through this woman. And because of that, I think we have an entire village that gets to know who Christ is and becomes a follower of his. And that's a great lesson for us and what we can do with our lives.
I don't really just have a big takeaway from here. I just think this story is like the perfect combination of all the lessons we've really talked about in this series. With Nathaniel, we talked about how Christianity spreads by, one person bringing another to Jesus. We see that with the woman bringing the townspeople to Jesus. With Jesus and the paralytic, we saw that Jesus is approachable, and the townspeople came to Jesus in this story. And we also saw that Jesus approaches us, and we see him approach the woman at the well. With Zacchaeus, we talked about how we're the reason Jesus came, to seek and save the lost. And Jesus sought this woman, saved this woman. So when I think about the story, I think about the word reconcile. Jesus sought this woman out to reconcile her with the Father. And I think reconciliation sums up everything we've been talking about for the past month or two, or however long we've been on this series. Our sin has separated us from God, and Jesus came to reconcile us and to be that link between us and God to bring us together. And that's why he's approachable, and that's why he approaches us, and that's why we spread the faith between one Christian and another. It just comes down to being reconciled with God and each other through Jesus.
So I don't really know what the takeaway from this is. I had one, but I'm going to go a different direction because something I just realized reading through this is this woman leaves in verse 28. She left her water jar and went away into town and said to the people, "Come see the man who said everything I ever did." And so they went out of the town and were coming to him. And I was reading back up here from last week, verse 7. Jesus is at the well with this woman by herself. And in parentheses, verse 8, his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. And so you've got two people groups who've gone to the same place. And the disciples are, if you're going to put them on a spectrum, they're going to be the more religious right now. They're going to be the more knowledgeable of who Jesus is and what he's about and what his ministry is. They're going to be the ones who should have picked up on his example a little bit better by now. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you got this woman who's lived, by all accounts, a pretty shameful life. And they're right by a city. The disciples go into the city and they don't bring anybody back. All they bring is some food back. This woman goes into the city and she brings everybody from the city back out. And so I'm wondering if there's a lesson there for us that says, hey, we're all out here. We're in town, we're in the community, we're living our lives in our specific worlds right now. And really, it's up to us what we do with those opportunities we have every day. It's up to us what we do with the people that are around us every day. The disciples went about their daily tasks, got to have food to eat, so let's go into the city and let's get some food and let's satisfy ourselves. The woman said, "Hey, I found something better than food. I found something better than water. I'm going to go tell everybody I know about it." They both went to the same place. They both returned with totally different results. And so maybe the lesson for us is we're out here and we're going to return some kind of results to our God and to our Lord. But it's up to us, really, what we do with those opportunities. I know that we plant and we water, and it's God who makes things grow. But this woman took it upon herself to do a lot of planting seeds and a lot of watering and say, "Come figure out what I've just figured out." Or, we can be like her, or we can be like the rest of the folks around us and just kind of go about daily stuff and do what we've always done and maybe get the same results that we've always gotten. I think the choice is probably up to us. That's all I got. Am I ending this? All right, so not ending just yet because we have exactly 1 week right now of drive-in church left. This coming Sunday, I think it's the 24th, will be our final service out at the parking lot. May 31st, we will be back in this building. It's going to be in some totally different ways. Instead of saying all that right now, tomorrow morning, Thursday morning at 8 o'clock, we have scheduled an announcement to go out on Facebook, email, and on our website. We will text out a link to that website or to that web page, and that's going to share with you what our plans are for re-entry into this building. It's going to be totally different, and we're trying our best to abide by guidelines that we've got to abide by and provide a safe environment for everybody, but we are trying to be out in front of this and be creative in how we can gather back together in person, socially distanced as a church family. So that'll be out 8 a.m. in your inbox, on your Facebook feed, and on our webpage. So check that out and hit Scott up if you got any questions about it. Have a good night.